We're going to go back 1,200 years. This is one of the oldest surviving records of Tibetan literature. It was written on the back of a Chinese parchment, actually, Dunhuang. On one side of it was Chinese script, and they flipped it over and they found Tibetan. So it's one of the oldest records ever, except for the ones on stone. You know, there's things in stone which are older, but those are a little bit hard to, you know, carry to a museum or whatever. So this is translated by Michael Buckley, a scholar. And just read it quickly. The center of heaven, this core of the earth, this heart of the world, fenced around with snow, the headland of all rivers, where the mountains are high and the land is pure. And you'll probably heard of a website called High Peaks Pure Earth. That's where it comes from. But you know, 1,200 years ago, they knew that they were the headland of all rivers. And that was not verified by the West until 20th century, basically, when they found the real source of the Sangpo. They were still arguing, you know, where the Sangpo came from. So, but the Tibetans knew all along. They knew where the source of the rivers were. They knew they all came from Kailash in the west. They knew the source of the Mekong. They just kept them secret. They didn't want to tell people. So this is an environmental poem. I mean, if you look, we've got Tenzin Sundu here, he's a poet. How does that read as a poem? Does it sound good to you? Good? Out of 10, it's good? Okay, so, you know, that's not the whole chronicle, it's just part of the chronicle, but still, it's a remarkable piece of work. And they were very proud of the fact that, you know, they had pure, everything was pure. They had pure water. That's not the case today, so I'm gonna move along here. I have a digital photo book. This is where it comes from. And I found that a lot of people, like this book here, people were not reading it. So then I developed a digital version, which is mostly photographs, more for the Facebook crowd, you know, which you could just pull it off and put it on, you know, pages like that. So this is Kawakapo in Kham. And, you know, thousands of years ago, the Tibetans had this idea of sacred landscape, which was far ahead of the West. I think Yellowstone Park in the US, one of the first national parks in the world, 1850s, you know. Tibetans was 2,000 years ago. They had this concept. Where you circumambulate the sacred peaks, you've got sacred mountains, you've got areas where the Lamas set aside areas which are not to be touched. So they didn't call them national parks, but basically they were areas where nothing was supposed to be touched, which is the same thing as a national park. You leave it alone. That was the philosophy. Don't kill the animals, leave everything alone. But they didn't call them national parks. So sacred valleys, sacred mountains, sacred lakes, even parts of the rivers. You know, Ganges is a sacred river, that's India, but they had the same concept here. So they practically invented it. If you want to go back to national parks, everybody goes back to Sri Lanka, where the story was that the king was out hunting and he changed his mind, decided not to kill the stag, or the stag started talking to him and said, that's not fair. You know, and then he changed his mind and banned hunting. That was one of the original stories about this. But I think the Tibetan stories go back much further than the Sri Lanka. Let's go back this way. Okay, so here's another sacred peak in the background. That's Minyak Konkar. It's quite a high peak, 7,556 meters. On your left over here, you have a nomad on a horse. So, you know, the idea, so many peaks in different areas of Tibet that in order to do a pilgrimage to all of them, you would probably spend 5 years or so to get to all of them. I mean, I've been to a few of them. I can't say that I've been to enough. You know, even going around Kailash is a major undertaking. You know, you have to get all the way out there. You have to go around, you know, it's quite a big trek, you know, it's sort of, and then, you know, everybody wants to get to Kailash once in their lifetime. But you've got these sacred peaks also in Amdo, like this one, Minyakonkar, Amni Machen. I have not been to this one. This circuit, I think, probably takes about 10 days, from what I understand. That's a major undertaking. And then some people prostrate, you know, that'll take twice as long. They're just prostrating on the ground, inchworming around. And, you know, different ways of getting, and then some people want to do it 2 or 3 times because they're not sure about the first one. So, you know, to be sure, you'll have to do the magical number of, I don't know, 10 or 108, something like that. So it's sort of built into the Tibetan system that, you know, there's reverence for the sacred peaks and the lakes. And along with this goes this whole value system of preserving nature, leaving it alone. So here's the most important mountain of all Asia, or the most sacred mountain. That's Kailash over there, and this is Chu Gompa. So around the peak, you've got about 5 or 6 important Gompas, where people will go to pray inside the Gompa. And this circuit is a killer circuit. It almost killed me. There's a big pass in the middle, Domala. And if you don't get over the pass, then you have to go back again. So you've got to get over the pass. But if you get bad weather, like snow, which some people encounter, then you might get caught in the middle of a snowstorm on top of Domala, then you're history. You know? So some people don't make it around the other side. But it's very barren. The area around here is very barren. So this mount is very striking because suddenly got this big ice cap that comes out of nowhere. And it's fantastic for photography because the perspective, the different viewpoints that you have there. And there is supposed to, it's not on this view, there is supposed to be some sign the way the glaciers fall. I don't have the right picture. It's in the shape of a yungtung, but I don't have the picture that would show that. Right? There's all kinds of legends. But anyway, I'll draw your attention to something here. There's that Kailash is the source of 4 major rivers in Asia, which all go through India. So we'll look at the map later. And the Tibetans told them this, but the British thought it was a joke. They thought it was a myth. They said, no, that's not possible. We've got all the records and, that doesn't work. But then later they found out the Tibetans were correct. There's 4 major rivers that come from within 100 kilometers of Kailash. Not exactly sourced right at Kailash, but pretty close. So they were right about the rivers, So they knew the terrain. So a little bit of history. We're going into our section over here. Early history. China came along. China does not have a lot of respect for nature. And I'm saying as a blanket claim, and I'm not saying about Chinese people, but generally about Chinese policy. They're not very respectful. So these are Tibetan antelopes. They used to number in the millions, and after invasion of Tibet, their numbers dropped very, very rapidly, plummeted, you might say, down to possibly 100,000 at, they were well down. So the reason that they were demolished or devastated was the wool, on the underwool. It's the most valuable, it's called chartouche, it's the most valuable fiber in the wool. Because you can make a shawl that'll fit through a ring, and all the women want one, right? So something happened around the 1980s. Suddenly became a big fad in Hollywood to have one of these chartreuse shawls that you could stuff into your pocket somewhere and then bring it out. And, so they were slaughtered by large numbers just for the underwool because you cannot keep them in captivity. They'll refuse to eat or die. So it's like the numbers plummeted for that reason. And so they were poached by Tibetans and by Chinese because they're worth a lot of money. That chartreuse is very, very expensive. And it went to Kashmir, where they were woven. And the Kashmiris denied they knew where it came from. They said it came from the chartreuse bird or something. The touche bird was the big one. The touche bird would drop their feathers or something. They made up all these stories. Anyway, this guy called George Schaller came along in the 1990s, and they proved that the chartreuse came from the antelope. And then the people in Kashmir the government in Kashmir banned the sale of chartreuse. So the Indians turned around and accused him of being a CIA agent. They didn't like this because it's putting him out of business, right? So then it went underground. There's still poaching of chartreuse. The numbers have recovered. But along with this killing of wildlife, 1960s and 70s, there used to be big herds of Kang, Tibetan wild ass, and there were big herds of even wild yaks. A lot of grazing animals, because there's so much grassland. So many, many grazing animals. Apart from the domestic ones, there were all the wild ones, right? They've pretty much vanished. If you go to Tibet, has anybody traveled in Tibet recently? Nobody? Come on.
I would like.
You would like? Okay, I've been there at least half a dozen times. I've never seen a wild antelope, never. And if I did, probably I would see a very small group, maybe 5 or 6. It's almost impossible, except if you go to Changtang. That's where the picture was taken, that's very far north. You don't see wild animals in groups anymore. The Kang, maybe 3 or 4, not a huge herd. Back in the 1940s, the British described the herds as so big that they sort of extended to the horizon. There were so many animals, like Africa, like the savannah. But that's all gone. And actually, the early delegations from India that went back to Tibet, they remarked on the silence of the grasslands. They said the grasslands, there's no noises. Where's the animals? No bird noises, no, the hoofs of the wild yaks, the thundering is all gone. Nothing. So what happened to all those animals? Well, Basically, a lot of them got gunned down by machine guns for food and for sport. It's like the Wild West in America. You know, the bison disappeared in about 10 or 20 years for sport. People shooting them from trains, things like this. So there goes your respect. The respect for the animals is just gone. And in 20 years, most of these animals disappeared. So that's the first casualty. Very big casualty, in fact. This is the second casualty. People don't associate wood much with Tibet. You think of a high plateau. If you look at some of these pictures, very barren, no trees, that's 5,000 meters. This is 2,500 meters. This is much lower. On the eastern and the southern slopes of Tibet, there's a lot of old-growth forest because, of course, they left it alone. They didn't need it. They used it for temples. They used logs like this for building temples. That's about the only reason they really needed the big logs, apart from building houses. Tibetan population was very low. Consumption was low. So, but when China came along, that's a Chinese truck, by the way, Dongfeng truck, back in the 1990s. 1980s. Used to get around Tibet in one of these. Kind of very reliable truck. Anyway, it means east wind. Dongfeng means east wind. So the east wind came in and took away the logs. Actually, if you look at the people working on the logs, some of them are actually Tibetans, Khampas, because they're making money. And they took down so much of the old-growth forest in East Tibet that it caused massive mudslides and landslides. And then, so what happened in the 1990s, there was massive flooding on the Yangtze. People were killed, hundreds of thousands were killed. And the Chinese government got the scientists in there and said, so why do we have this massive flooding? And they said, well, you cut all the trees down. Oh, so then they banned logging in eastern Tibet. So then what happened was that the Chinese logging companies, which are interested in furniture and chopsticks, whatever they use the logs for, mostly furniture for export and a lot of chopsticks, they went to other parts of Southeast Asia and started taking all the forests out in those areas, which they're still doing today. West Papua, totally devastated by Chinese logging companies. Malaysia, totally devastated. I could keep going. The teak in Myanmar, last stands of teak left on the planet. It's being devastated by Chinese loggers because it's very valuable for yachts. And they have billionaires that, they need the teak for their yachts. So Thailand, taking all the big logs out of there. So it had a very severe knock-on effect. When they finished logging in East Tibet, then they went to the other countries and logged those. They have a voracious appetite for these things. So those are the first two big casualties. Now we're going to jump forward a little bit. This is 2006, the railway. The railway was extremely bad news for environment or anything to do in Tibet because it made it economical to export mineral resources, logging, whatever you want, and bring in migrant workers by the thousands. Like if you want to put up a dam, you need 20,000 migrant workers coming from East China. To bring them in by airplane would cost you far too much money. And then you have to send them home for the holidays. New Year, they have to go home. Otherwise, they're not very happy. So I took this picture myself. They probably didn't see me. They're not looking at me anyway. But this is a Chinese military arriving. You can see all the bags. So it's another problem. It's the train, but it's also used for transporting military coming in, people going out, minerals going out, groundwater. Groundwater is suddenly economically viable. There was no export of groundwater in terms of bottled water before 2006. It was not economical. It was too expensive. If you took it in a truck, by the time it got there, it had been jangled around so much it was sort of unrecognizable. And then, it just wasn't viable. So the train arriving in 2006, they said it couldn't be done. For a long time, they said this train was not possible to build because of the permafrost. The permafrost was melting, but China actually took some technology from Canada, which you put pipes into the ground, you freeze the ground so it can't sink. And that's what they did. So they're actually damaging the permafrost in this process by freezing the ground so that it can't buckle. And so they took that technology from Canada. Actually, it's something to do with ice hockey rinks. I haven't investigated that, but ice hockey rinks, you have to freeze them, otherwise the players will end up, doing strange things. They're very good at stealing the technology that they need to get the result that they want, and they got the railway through to Lhasa. Not only that, now they're extending the railway to Kathmandu. It's got as far as Sugati, and it's heading west towards the pass of a very unstable ground, which is prone to earthquakes. It's heading down to Kathmandu. So they're extending it. Then in the east, they're also extending it. They're going east. They want to go to Chengdu. They want to go to Chongqing, direct on the train. So anywhere where the train goes, a lot of damage follows. And there's been a sort of, the effect has been an acceleration of exploitation since the train. Before the train, things were moving, slowly. Now the train's here. The hockey curve is going up for exploitation. It's really going fast. So this is extremely bad news. Anyway, we'll take some of the central problems here. This was taken by a friend of mine called Pat Morrill. He's a mountaineer. First Canadian on Everest, second Canadian on Everest, sorry. The first Canadian with a camera on top. The other guy didn't have a camera. So that's his first view of Tibet. He was standing on the top. He climbed up from the Nepalese side, and he looked down, and there's Rongbuk Glacier, right? So it's a phenomenal view. Of course, he went back to Tibet later, by land, airplane, the normal way. But I think this is a remarkable picture because you can see how much ice and snow there is, and how valuable that is for making rivers and all the other things that the other jobs that the glaciers fulfill. So I think this is the way you should remember Tibet, that it's ice, snow, glaciers, very, very important to the downstream countries, because that's where the major source of the rivers is, apart from the monsoons. The monsoon rains, which is extremely difficult to capture, right? So we got another picture here taken from the same area, and I will show you why Tibet is so important. They call it the Cryosphere, which is, the area which is snowpack, ice, melting, meltwater, all of that stuff. It's all there at Everest, right? And that's what will form, eventually goes into the Arun River. I'll show you a map later. And then it goes down into Nepal, and then it goes down to the Ganges, and then it goes to the ocean, right? So it's all coming from here. So in terms of rivers, the snowpack is extremely important, the snowpack and the ice, because it's a very slow drip. It's a slow drip, and it lasts all the way through the summer, right? We'll come back to that picture over here where they're trying to do the same thing with the glacier in Ladakh. They're trying to replicate what the glacier does. Not quite as good, but the principle is the same. So it's doing drip, drip, drip all through the summer, right? And then it freezes again in the winter, so there's no drip, drip, it stops, and then same thing happens again. So Lonnie, there's a glaciologist who has compared this to a bank account. So you got this coming in, and then you got this going out. So you got water coming in, you got water going out, water coming in. But what happens if there's, all the water's going out, but there's no more water coming in? Then you've got a big problem. Suddenly you've got a bankrupt situation. So you've got to think of this like a bank account. The ice is coming in, the ice is going out. But what happens if that process is disrupted? So we're going to show what happens when the process is disrupted. Sorry, this one. This is taken on a high pass in Sikkim, 6,000 meters up. You'd think it'd be nice and clean and fresh and everything. Same mountain here. It's not. It's dirty. And that is a picture of black soot. Even in the middle of nowhere in Sikkim, which does not have a big population in Sikkim. This is black soot particles over here. You can see the prayer flags have faded from the sun, except for the blue one. We don't know why the blue one has not faded. The other colors are gone, right? Not the blue one. So remember, you should always buy blue ones. But anyway, so what's happening here? The sun is so strong that it's taken the colors out of the prayer flags. But what also happens is that the sun is attracted to the black, and that will speed up glacial melt, because white will reflect the sun, but the black will absorb it. So what happens when it absorbs it? It speeds up the glacial meltdown, which is not a good news. But where is the black soot coming from? I think, I don't know if we have a map of that. No, we don't have a map of that. Black soot is solvable. If you took away all the burning of fossil fuels, like wood, coal, all of those things, the atmosphere would clear within a month. But unfortunately, you're dealing with two huge populations on both sides of the Himalayas. You got the Chinese population, 1.3 billion, 1.4, it went up. 1.4 billion, then you got the Indian is 1.3 billion. That's 2.7, and the total world population is 7.5, so it's about a third, right? Roughly a third of humanity is showering down black soot on the Himalayas, some way or another. It's wafting in with the wind. So to solve this problem, one solution is to introduce cook stoves which are more efficient, that don't throw out so much black soot. They've been trying to do that. They're more expensive. So instead of burning wood, burn some other fuel which does not send up black soot. So actually the same particles, PM 2.5 is the same thing that you have in Delhi when you're breathing. The stuff that goes in there, it's the same thing. It's these particles floating around in the air, and if you don't have a mask, they'll go into your lungs, right, and they'll kill you eventually. So it's killing the glaciers. It's causing them to melt. So, nobody's doing anything about this problem. The Chinese have not stopped building the coal-fired plants. The Indians have done nothing. Even though they signed these climate change agreements, what have they done? Nothing. If you want to solve the problem, you have to deal with the cooking stoves, you have to deal with the fossil fuels which are coming out of the diesel trucks, and you have to shut down the coal-fired plants. They can't do it because there's no other power source right now. So nobody's doing much, which is rather tragic. We're going to switch here to some water resources. You can see why the Tibetan Plateau is really important in this map. I had this map custom made for me, and people copy it. I know I planted some stuff in there that I can figure out who stole it. First thing they do is try and cut my name off down there. But then they have to cut the delta off, so not so good. We'll draw your attention to Mount Kailash. That's one of the first things I put on this map here. 4 rivers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the Ganges is pretty close. 4 rivers come from Kailash, which is what the Tibetans said all along. That this Kailash is the source of all rivers. Well, all rivers going to India, for example. So they start at Kailash, but look where they finish. These two finish here. Yalung Sangpo is finishing here. That's a very long distance from where the source was, right? It's thousands of kilometers apart. And if you look at the Ganges is rising in the Indian Himalayas, but look at the feeders. The feeders, Karnali here, Sankosi, Arun from Everest, and then Brahmaputra eventually before it comes down to the delta. They're all coming from Tibet. So you can practically say that it's at least 50% Tibetan river, the Ganges. And there's, of course, if you're familiar with the legends, Ganga, the goddess, comes from Kailash, right? She's from the hair of, Shiva? Yeah, she's from the hair of Shiva. And she's the protectress of the river. Not that it's helping much today because they have so many factories and stuff along the, it's a total mess. But she's connected with Kailash. That legend is connected with Kailash, and they got it right, There is a very close connection between the Ganges and Kailash. So we had these goddesses and so on trying to protect rivers like this before, but that's all fallen by the wayside. And, there's not too many people doing much about protecting them. You must be familiar with the amount of plastic that's going into the ocean. They say that 10 major rivers around the world are contributing the most plastic. And I'll tell you some of those rivers. Mekong is one of them. Yangtze is another one. There's something like, I can't remember the 10 rivers. You can check it on Google. 10 of the rivers are contributing much more plastic than the rest of the rivers around the world. We're including Africa rivers there, but I think 4 of the rivers at least are coming from Asia. And I think this may be one of them. I'm not sure exactly, the Indus. Anyway, I could talk about this map for a couple of hours, but I won't, because we don't have enough time. But it's important to get this picture that that's the Tibetan Plateau, which spills over into Bhutan, Nepal, parts of India. It's not exclusively Tibet. There's a border here. You get a borderline going through here. But most of the Tibetan Plateau is actually on the Chinese side, or PRC. So, of course, the Chinese don't like the word Tibetan Plateau. They try to change it to Qinghai Plateau, or Qinghai Tibetan Plateau, or Chinese Plateau within the Tibetan region, or something like that. They don't like this word Tibetan. They've tried it on Isimod, they've tried it on various reports to try and get it changed, because that gives the credit to Tibet. They don't want to give the credit. So, but anyway, some of these rivers are failing, particularly Yellow River. Yellow River rises in Amdo, and when we say a failing river, what we mean is it doesn't do what a river is supposed to do. And what that means is it should run to the sea, number one. If it doesn't run to the sea, it's failed. Something wrong. So I don't know how many days a year that the Yellow does not reach the sea, but I think it's a significant number. It's something like at least over 150 days in a year. It does not reach the ocean. We'll explain why that's a big problem later, but the other problem with the yellow, it's called the yellow because of the amount of sediment. It's very yellow. The sediment is the sort of nutrients that come off the mountains, goes through gorges, collects a whole lot of sediment. It's a very yellow color, right? So what's happening now is because of the dams, the sediment is not going through. It's getting blocked by the dams. And the other thing is that people are not using the Yellow River for agriculture because it's toxic. So they're using groundwater. And when you've got a river that you cannot use for even agriculture, can you imagine you would not be drinking it? So then the river's not working. It's not working as a river. But the other thing is when you get to the ocean, like here, that's where the river meets the sea. There's a battle going on between the ocean and the freshwater, saltwater, freshwater. If your freshwater goes down, the saltwater will rise. And there's the thing, the oceans are actually rising a little bit anyway, right? So if this river fails to reach the sea or the volume is lower, then the salt water starts coming in and then it will destroy your crops. Because there's no crops on Earth that can stand that much salt water. They can stand a little bit of salt water, but not a lot. So there's a big problem in the Mekong Delta down here in Vietnam. They've got a lot of saltwater intrusion down there because the sediment's not coming in to build the delta up. And, that kills the crops. So then what do? They can change from rice to another crop. Or they can try and, the solution's not very good at this point. So I'll explain a little bit about Vietnam Delta. It's actually collapsing. There's houses falling into the river because there's not enough sediment coming in and the people are, dredging the sand. So I was actually in Vietnam 2 months ago, and we went to someone's house that had just fallen in, and we found the guy, and he said that he was sitting there in the morning having his iced coffee, and he noticed that the iced coffee was, shaking like by itself. So he ran outside. The whole house went straight into the Mekong River, like a earthquake, just boom. And there's 3 reasons for that. The first reason is the sediment is being blocked by dams. There's not coming in. A delta is made of sediment. That's what it's made of. There's 2 kinds of sediment, one for building and the other kind for nutrients, right? The other reason is there's sand dredging, a major amount of sand dredging going on because the river sand is the best sand you can use for concrete. In fact, beach sand has too much salt. And the other kind is desert sand, but desert sand, the granules are too round, apparently. So that's the second reason. The third reason is they're pumping the groundwater like crazy because they don't trust the actual river. They're pumping. They use these, what do you call it? A small pump. It's about this big, and it goes straight 20 feet down, pumps. But when you pump, your delta is starting to sink because that groundwater is part of the delta. So this is not only happening at that man's house, it's happening all over the delta, that these houses are just collapsing. Anyway, we'll come back to that later, but this is the Yaleng Sampo, Great Bend of the Yaleng Sampo. This has the highest hydro potential in the world, not been exploited yet. The idea, or the Chinese idea, is to drill a hole from here. It goes around, this is the bend that confused so many geographers, because they thought it was, was from different rivers, but the thing does a neat trick. It turns the corner very quickly. So the idea is to drill a hole from here over to there, put the turbine somewhere in the middle, and generate 44 gigawatts of power, which is twice the size of the Three Gorges Dam. It has not been done yet. If they made a mistake, they could damage the whole of the Brahmaputra all the way down into India. Things can go seriously wrong. So it's on the drawing board. There's actually 2 dams. One is 44, the other one's 32, I think. The biggest dam in the world is Three Gorges, 22 gigawatts. They give you an idea of the scale here. 1930, the biggest dam in the world was Hoover Dam, was 2 gigawatts. Now that may not mean very much to you, but Three Gorges is 10 times bigger than Hoover. The 10 times bigger than the biggest dam in the world is a major step. So the Chinese do not view this as scenic beauty or anything to be used for tourism. They're viewing it as purely exploitation. How do I get the most hydropower out of this? And I should point out, Indian side of this river, in Arunachal, the same thing is happening with Indian dam builders. There's a lot of corrupt people going after Arunachal because the other side of this river, that's what China claims Arunachal actually. They've claimed it as South Tibet. They don't recognize Tibet, but Arunachal is South Tibet. So it's kind of peculiar. But they've said that, this originally was Tibetan area. Well, there's some truth to that. But there's a big battle going on between the indigenous peoples on these areas and the people that want to exploit the dam for hydropower. Green gold, blue gold, let's call it. So this is the way the river should look. That's a tributary of the Sangpo, called the Po Sangpo. We'll point out the kayaker over here. It's a sort of life and death situation. If you don't know how to kayak, forget it. You're never going to make it through that corner. I've done a little bit of kayaking, and it's terrifying. And that was in a lot more conditions than this. But I'll do the rafting, but even the rafting is problematic. These are they call it Class 5 river. If it's Class 6, forget it. You'll never be able to take a Class 6. Nobody's ever done a Class 6. Class 2 and 3 is okay. That's not bad, but when you get up to Class 5. So the problem is, if he hits this rock, and even with the helmet, not a good situation. And if he goes out of the kayak, then he goes for a swim. So he's practically dead anyway. So you've got to stay in the kayak. Anyway, is that mine? Oh, sorry. Turn it off, or whatever. Okay, sorry, that was mine. I left it on for the photographs, so I have to figure out some way of leaving it on for photographs without, anyway. So this is Chris Jones in the kayak. He went up there with a group of people. These rivers have never been run before. The first, the biggest thing on the kayaker's wish list is a river, Virgin River, that's never been run before. So this is one of them. And of course, if it's never been run before, you could run into some huge obstacles. Sudden waterfall or something pops up unless you have the right maps. But I just want to show you the enormous power of these rivers. These are the most powerful rivers on the face of the planet. It's called the Everest of Whitewater. And it's only the top professional kayakers that will even think about it. And a number have been killed as well. A couple of Japanese kayakers killed. They get caught in the eddy and they can't come up fast enough. End of story, So you've got to be really, really good professional kayaker. So that's the way the river should be for kayakers and rafters, exploiting. You have kayakers exploiting it, not the dam builders. Scenic beauty. These are beautiful canyons, gorgeous. By the way, Yalangsampo Canyon is the deepest in the world. They thought the Grand Canyon was the deepest, but the Yalangsampo is 5 times deeper than the Grand Canyon. To give you an idea, we don't have a picture of the canyon, but it's 500 kilometers long. It's the deepest canyon in the world. They only found that out late 1990s. Guinness Book of Records, did it then. So a lot of this is unexplored. We'll go back to the Yangtze. I'll just point out some things in this picture. Those are engineers. That's an engineer there. There's another one, or maybe workers, I'm not sure. You can get an idea of the scale of this thing. It's enormous. They don't build small dams in China. They build mega dams, really big ones. So if that does not disrupt the ecosystem, then I don't know what will. It's a massive, you can consider it to be arteries. Take away one artery, maybe you'll survive. Take away 2, you still got a chance of survival. Lose an arm, you'll still be okay. Lose a leg, well, okay, you can get along. But what if you lose too much? You can't operate. And that's what's happening to the rivers. They just get cut up, blocked, cut up. And eventually it doesn't work as a river. It's not a river anymore. It becomes a series of lakes. So this is one in progress. And as pointing out before, the Three Gorges Dam is the largest one on the planet. But some of the other ones in the Upper Yangtze, just the other day, there was one announced at 2 gigawatts, 2.4, on the border of Sichuan and TAR. That was just the other day. It's called LTWA. That's an enormous dam. It's the same size as the Hoover Dam was back in 1930. It's the biggest one ever in Tibet, in the real Tibetan areas, because these are lower down. These are not high elevation. So they're moving up. Once they get the technology of building at altitude, then they're starting to build up the river, Well, I've been doing a fair bit of work on, this is on the Mekong River. It's called Shawan Dam. I've been doing a fair bit of work on the Mekong itself because the Mekong is reaching the stage where it's really falling apart, it's collapsing. The whole ecosystem is just going down the drain. And this is why. There are 8 dams like this in Yunnan, 8 mega dams. They give you an idea of the scale of this thing. The height of the dam, we don't have a person, you can't see a little person down there, but it'd probably be about, that big. Because the height of the dam from the water, from the base up, is 292 meters. That is double the size of the Potala Palace for height. And the width is also double the size of the Potala Palace. So If you imagine the size of the Patala, that thing is double, more than double. And then the reservoir here goes back 160 kilometers. And that is probably more damaging than the dam itself because there's stagnant water. There's nothing moves in there. The fish are not very happy about it either. And then the sediment gets trapped behind the dam. And technically the sediment is supposed to be released here. These things, right? They're supposed to release it. But apparently on this design, only 3 of them work. The other ones don't work, which means the sediment's clogging up the dam. And then the downstream countries, they're starved of sediment. They don't get the sediment. So right now the problem is not the water, it's the sediment that the dams are blocking, right? So this is called Sichuan. A little bit further upstream from that one, there's a thing called Noazadu, which is 5,800 megawatts, which may not mean that much to you. But if you put these 2 dams together, it would be enough to power a small nation like Iceland or Lithuania easily. 10 gigawatts. That's plenty of power. That could, a whole nation could be powered up just on these 2 dams. So you wonder why they're building such huge dams. Well, unfortunately, they've introduced UHV lines, which can transport that power all the way east to Shanghai. So the power is not used locally anymore. It's a recent development. German technology started around the early 2000s. Before, they could only use the power in the same area, or maybe as far as Chongqing or something. But now they can transport it all the way across 3,000 kilometers and use it in a factory in Shanghai, right? So here's the problem. The water is going to come down in some volume as the glaciers melt, but eventually there'll be no water once the glaciers are completely melted. So then you have a dam that doesn't work because without the water, the turbines are not going to move. So eventually these things are going to become useless. It will take another 50, 60 years. But the other thing about dams is they don't last forever. After 50 or 60 years, they have to either bring the dam down and rebuild it, or they have to do major renovation because it's going to crack. And there was a case in the Sichuan Earthquake where they started emptying all the water out of these dams because they're afraid they're going to crack. The Sichuan Earthquake was 2008. And they rushed to empty it, but they forgot to tell the people downstream in Thailand that all this water was going to come in. So the farmers going to open the door and say, oh my God, it's not monsoon. Where's this water coming from? And they complained, but it was too late. They destroyed all the crops. See, the Chinese are not very good with the downstream countries. They don't tell them, they don't give them information, they don't give them feedback, they don't tell them what's happening with the dams. And that was a major example of that on the Mekong. It was opening the floodgates of that. So, more water resources. This is Yamdrok-so, one of the top sacred lakes. It's in central Tibet, near Gyansi. The peak on the horizon there is Kulakangri, which is on the Bhutanese border. Beautiful color in this lake. By the way, this picture was taken some time ago, probably around the early 2000s, maybe 2005. The color may not be the same anymore. Can't guarantee that color anymore. The reason for that is that around the corner here, they've built a pumped storage dam, which is the most stupid idea in the world. It's you put a pump, you pump the water out of the lake, you pump it into the Yalangsampo, and then you replace it with water back from the Yalangsampo. That's to supply electricity to Lhasa. Well, why not just put a whole lot of solar panels on the hills? It would do the same thing. It's not a great amount of energy that's coming out of it, but this is a sacred lake, so of course you're going to alter the whole environment by doing that. You may even change the color of the lake because this is glacial meltwater. It's very, very, very blue color, right? So it was an Austrian company that came in and helped them build that pump storage dam. It's a novel design. And they don't have a very good track record, this particular Austrian company. They go into third world countries where where the locals are resisting, but they don't care. They have no ethics whatsoever. And that's the same with the Chinese approach. They don't consult the locals, they don't do anything. So this is a prime breeding ground for things like black-necked cranes, It's a marshy area. It's very wet around the foreshores, used by a lot of birds. That will change the whole picture just for some small amount of energy going back to Lhasa, which is not even needed. So, of course, Tibetans are very upset about that. There's a lot of protests. It was extremely controversial. Many people tried to stop it. It went ahead anyway. There was international protest. It was back in the 1990s, I think it was. International groups saying this is wrong, why are you doing this is stupid, but they still went ahead and built it. And, okay, this is Lama Latso, very small lake, central Tibet again. Actually, the reason I got these monks in the photograph is we gave them a ride in a Jeep. And they were so happy they just posed anywhere I wanted to. So, because they were on a pilgrimage to go around the lake. It would probably take like 4 or 5 days. And we gave them the final leg in on the Jeep. Picked them up and said, where you want to go? And then I got lots of stuff there. But this is the lake, where the Oracle Lake, where the reincarnations of the Dalai Lama, divinations are done. It's a beautiful area. And you also find blue poppies around this area. Very interesting, wonderful flower, very deep blue. And you can see the katas here. Those are katas that are coming down from people that have left offerings and so on. So you have sacred mountains, you also have sacred lakes. There's a lot of sacred stuff in Tibet. The only people I've seen that spend more time praying and worshipping are the people in Bali. They just, they're praying like 20 times a day and leaving flowers and put stuff on the street. It's quite remarkable. But the Tibetans come in a pretty good close second, I think. So water resources. This is a nomad's collecting, this is Manasarovar, another sacred lake. He's collecting, same idea as the Ganges, he's collecting sacred water to take it home, not for drinking. This is, water that you take home for blessings and other things. So I think that's what he's doing. But we should talk about water resources. The water in Tibet, the Tibetans have always prided themselves on the water being pure and just drink straight from the lake and the river, no problem. But they can't say that anymore. Like in Gyama, East Tibet, yaks have been poisoned from drinking the water. Well, how do you get the yaks to drink something else? What are they going to do? They can't drink groundwater. Where are they going to get the groundwater from? Of course, they've been drinking river water for centuries, right? So it's a big change that you would have a situation where suddenly it was pure water, and they prided themselves on the water. And now they're thinking about, maybe I shouldn't be drinking this water. Maybe I should be drinking the bottled water, right? And of course, there is a lot of bottled water going on. When I first arrived there in '85, there was 2 or 3 brands of bottled water. Now there's at least 20. And they've given licenses to all these Chinese companies to come in and take as much groundwater as they want. They give them tax breaks. And the reason the Chinese want this water is that Tibetan water is regarded as pure, whereas the Chinese water, God knows where that comes from. So if they put it in little bottles and take it back to Beijing, it's going to sell for 3 times the value. It's groundwater. It doesn't come from the lakes or the rivers. It comes from groundwater. So groundwater in Tibet is very plentiful as opposed to India where they're running out. Basically, there's very little groundwater left in India. Same problem in China. But there's tons of groundwater in Tibet. It's never been exploited, never. But now you've got the train, and the train can exploit it. So going to move along to a few other problems here. There's lots of problems when it comes to environment. No shortage of problems. And this is a major one. It's a beautiful photograph taken by a mountaineer, east side of Everest, Tom Alonso, Carter Valley. Carter Valley is one of the most beautiful valleys you'll ever see because of the background. I mean, towering snow caps, So what's happening here is it's a summer camp for the nomads. They move up here for the summer. They dine on the grass, and then in the winter they would go back to their huts lower down because it's too damn cold here in the winter. As you can see, a water resource here. So, the yaks and so on, they can drink that water, no problem. It's not being polluted because it's a long way away from any mining process or anything. So it looks very nice, but there's a lot of problems afoot with the grasslands these days. The major one is that China wants to settle every single nomad. They don't want any nomads left because they can't control them. They don't have addresses. They don't have, they never went to the school where they can teach them things. So they're beyond their control. So the best solution is to get rid of all the yaks, get rid of all the nomads, put them all in schools, concentration camps, whatever you like to call them, and then they can control them. The problem is that these nomads have no jobs. That is their job. So if they go to these camps, they have no skills, there's no retraining going on. There's, they don't train them as carpenters or whatever, and they have no language skills. They can't speak Chinese. They can't even write in Tibetan. So, they're kind of lost people once that happens, once you take them away from their traditional grazing lands. And then the other problem that's happening on the grazing lands is, we'll come to that in a second, wait a minute. This is their traditional source of fuel, yak dung, which is plentiful as long as you have a lot of yaks. Should point out the yak hair tent. That's a yak hair tent. You can see through it a little bit. This is pretty waterproof, works very well. So, from the yak, they can get the yak dung. This is tea time, by the way. She's about to have some tea. which nomads drink a lot of tea, sometimes 30, 40 cups a day. Now, you might think that this is a very strange habit, but they've found in the Arctic that the Inuit people, they eat seal blubber. Seal blubber is very high in fat, and it's the same thing with the tea, very high fat content. So it actually works very well for altitude. It keeps you warm. They don't get frostbite. You haven't heard of too many Tibetan nomads that get frostbite. And maybe that's one of the reasons, is that they drink in this tea all day with the yak butter. It's giving them a lot of fat content. So the old system is you had the yak dung, you got a yak hair tent, you're self-sufficient. The only thing you need is grains, which you can barter with the farmers. So they didn't need money. There was no need for money in the old system. They had everything worked out. They had the cheese, they had the curd. You know, occasionally they kill the yak for meat, but not so often. And then they pretty much, it was self-generating. They didn't need any outside help. But if they settled, then they need all kinds of, they have to pay for water, they have to pay for electricity. This is an area which is mixed. It's mixed grasslands, but also farming. So I believe there is a word in Tibetan, somebody was telling me, for people that are halfway between nomads and farmers. Yeah, that word hasn't sunk in yet. Samadrok? Yeah, all right, I'll get that into the vocabulary at some point. So how do you switch from being the nomad into the farmer? Do you just do both?
Yeah, both.
So it's like half and half?
Seasonal?
Seasonal?
Yeah.
Seasonal, okay, that makes more sense, seasonal. So as we can see down here, you've got rapeseed, so this is a crop that they're farming, and then of course out here you'll have grazing, because that's wonderful looking grassland, right? So people are saying, well, grasslands is not exactly a natural system, it's evolved over thousands of years. You know, it's not a natural thing. Grasslands are kind of not 100% natural. It depends, you know, so many grazing animals in Tibet. You had the yak, you had all the wild animals, you had the antelopes, you had the, you know, the kiang. There was tons of things grazing. So the idea was, if you let the grass grow too high, maybe that system doesn't work too well. The yaks nibble it down. They don't pull it up. But unfortunately, some animals pull the grass out. In Mongolia, like the Kashmir goats, they've overgrazed. And then they pull the grass right up by the roots. The yaks don't do that, they nibble. So yaks are ideal, and most of the grazing animals are ideal. The only problem is the Kashmir goat in Mongolia. They destroyed the grasslands and turned it into desert. So if your grasslands does not work, what's going to happen is the desert's going to come in, which is happening all over Tibet and Mongolia and other parts of China. And you know, it's very hard to stop an advancing desert. How do you stop a desert? Really tough. The best defense is to keep the nomads on the grassland and keep them grazing, and that will keep away the desert, you know. But there's a huge problem with desertification across Tibet, very big problem. We're going to move into something a little bit less salubrious. This is mining. I don't know if you're familiar with asbestos, banned in Canada. They make asbestos in Canada, but they're not allowed to sell it in Canada. They can only export it. It's so dangerous, right? So many countries have banned asbestos because it gets into your lungs and kills you. And this guy is working at an asbestos factory in far west Qinghai, and he's probably going to be dead in I don't know how many years, but that mask is not going to help. No way. So the photographer, this Norwegian photographer, managed to get to this place, and he was just stunned, you know, like by the lack of sort of precautions, lack of safety, lack of everything. But China loves asbestos. They use it in everything. And it's banned, so they even take, you've got a train made in, you know, train car made in China, goes to Australia, and they say, you know, does it have asbestos? No. And then 2 years later, they discover it has asbestos, so they just take it all back and say, okay, it's going to go back now, because you broke the rules, you know, which is, you said there's no asbestos. They had a big problem with Great Wall car. There's a car called not Great Wall, something like that. They imported them to another place, I think in Europe, and then the inspectors found asbestos in the car, and they took it back to the manufacturer and said, did you know this has asbestos? And they said, yeah. I said, well, did you know that asbestos is banned? No, I didn't know that. So anyway, that's what's happening. Very, very few safety regulations. They don't care about the environment. They just go ahead and mine. So this is, I didn't take that picture. A satellite took that picture. It was taken by a machine. Wonderful satellites that are, see, the thing is, China cannot hide from Google Earth. Google Earth can show you everything. Even, so what's happening here, this is Qinghai. There's a big area of Qinghai which is called Sidam Basin. half of Qinghai is supposed to be national parks, but the other half is total industry, oil, gas, natural gas, mining, and all kinds of mining. So it's really hard to have it both ways. You have the national parks or you have the industry, or you can't really have both, but they do have both. So this is the other half. So the lakes look really pretty, but there's a lot of damage being done here. So what they're doing is they're concentrating salts in pools to extract things like, I'm not sure, or potassium, bromite. This is not lithium, but lithium was very similar. So you can see different lakes here. There's a series of lakes. And in the process, you could probably tell the lake is never going to be the same again. That will not be the same lake after you've exploited it, right? It's going to be destroyed. So the big issue now is lithium, because China is racing hell for leather to get as much lithium as it can, not only in Tibet, but around the world. They're going down to Chile. They're trying to sew up the entire world market for lithium because the electric vehicles come along. BYD is making buses in London, making buses in San Francisco. They need lithium. So they'd never tell you where this lithium comes from, but one of the biggest sources in the world for lithium happens to be Qinghai and West Tibet, where BYD has 20-year leases. Right outside Golmud, they're building the biggest lithium battery factory in the world. It's going to be finished this year or next year. The next biggest lithium battery in the world is Tesla. They're beating Tesla, BYD, for this. So there's a huge amount of interest in lithium, and Tibet is part of that interest, right? Unfortunately, it has a rather bad environmental aspects. And there was a case in eastern Tibet where the rivers suddenly ended up with a whole lot of dead fish. And the people started collecting the dead fish, and they took it to the town hall or whatever, dumped them in front of the town hall and say, hey, what's going on here? And they had cell phones, so they had pictures of this. And of course, the Chinese response was to round them up and put them in prison. So, that's the normal Chinese response to an environmental process that is not within China. You have more success in China. So, there are a lot of protests. And I'm sure Tseri Tomo can tell you, over here from TCHRD, she could tell you lots of stories. But unfortunately, the protest does not go very far in Tibet, because they'll round them up, they'll shoot them, they'll imprison them, If it was a Chinese NGO in, Sichuan, Yunnan, they will go much further. They don't get put in prison. It's a sort of legitimate process, but I wanted to show you the future of Tibet. That's not a very pretty picture either, but this is Mongolia, inner Mongolia, the Chinese side. It's a place called Wuhai. And Wuhai used to be a grape producing center and a dairy. Nice rustic place making handicrafts, things like that, So tourists would go in there and, get some wine, drink the dairy stuff and buy some handicrafts. Then they discovered coal. And there used to be 4 factories in the middle of town. Now there's more than 400 in the space of 10 or 20 years. So that, of course the grape producing and everything has gone black in this town. It's covered in black, whatever. Even the chickens are black. The animals are black. The dogs are all black. So it's become a horrendous, you imagine the pollution that goes on. You can see the pollution. There's the chimneys, just polluting. So that's the kind of thing that could happen in Tibet if they wanted to exploit it even more, like aluminum smelters. They do not have aluminum smelters inside Tibet. They take the aluminum to another place. But they could actually build it, in Qinghai. They've done a lot in Qinghai. Parts of Qinghai do look like this, with the exploitation of Saidam Basin. And unfortunately, they're discovering new sources like oil sands, fracking. They're coming up with new things of exploitation that will be even more devastating than the other forms. And we're going to move a little bit down to the downstream countries. I think we've got a little bit of time. Downstream countries, this is downstream on the Brahmaputra. And the crop here is wheat. And they're heavily dependent on the river for irrigation, but also for nutrients. There's 16 kinds of nutrients come down in the sediment. If you use artificial fertilizer, you only get 3. That's why I was talking to a scientist. That's why the natural water has got a lot more stuff in it than the artificial fertilizer, right? So they're heavily dependent. If the dams block the silt, then they have to use artificial fertilizer. They've got to find a way around it. This is a picture I took. It's Mustang, the start of the Mustang Trek, Keg Benny. And you can see it's a low, the river's very low here. It's in the summer. Actually, the summer should be higher. Maybe it's not in the summer, fall. Anyway, you can see the fields here. These are probably barley over here. So the irrigation is totally dependent on that river. They're not using groundwater. And it's a very rustic area. There's not a big population. It's a very powerful river, Kaligandaki, coming down from the Tibetan border. And without that river, well, your whole crops are going to suffer. You know, there's a water security, food security issue. And this is I think that's let's go on a bit further. This is a picture, we have it on the wall over here, ice stupa. A brilliant solution to a problem that if the water is low in the summer months, how about storing it in the winter and let it drip slowly, the same as a glacier? So Sonam Wangchuk is an engineer, came up with this idea. The shape is like a stupa, you know, like a regular stupa. So he called it an ice stupa. It took a number of years to develop these things. They used crowdfunding to raise the money. I think it cost about $30,000 or something. They're still making them. Now they have a competition. They're trying to get more money to build more and more of these things. And down the bottom, recently, they've put a cafe. They have a cafe in the bottom. It's called the Ice Stupa Cafe. It can take about 6 people. I don't know if you have a hot chocolate or I don't know what you have in there. They're doing other things, like you can climb to the top. You get ropes, and they have a climbing thing. You climb up there for sport. So they're doing all sorts of wonderful things with these ice stupas. You know, I mean, the solution in Switzerland to stop mountains melting is put a blanket over them, you know. So this is a lot better solution. You know, they're coming up with something. You know, the solutions are all coming out of Ladakh. They're coming out of Sikkim. They're coming out of Bhutan. These are Tibetan areas where you're getting solutions. And actually, the person behind this particular one, the funder, was the Drikung Kagyu leader, whose name is... Yeah, he's one of the major funders, because this is right near a monastery. It's Piang Monastery, right? And they wanted his backing. They wanted his financial backing because they want people to work on it. And they won't work unless they get the blessing of the Drikung Kagyu leader. He said, okay, and then everybody goes and works, right? So it's this combination between the engineer, the monk, the people. Everybody's going on this thing together. I just got to, this is another solution here. This is Bhutan, 100% organic. There's no chemicals, nothing used in Bhutan. They decided they're not going to have GM food. They're going to go fully organic. First country in the world to do that. Why is Bhutan the first country in the world? Well, they have a very small population. It's a very mountainous area, so you can't do industrial farming anyway, because it's too mountainous. It's like terracing. There's a lot of terracing. Draw your attention to the forest. That huge forest that's around this land here. They have preserved their forest more than any other country in the world. 70% forest cover. India, I think, is something less than 20 at the moment. And they have a law. You can't cut down the trees unless it's a community forest. If you cut down a tree, you go to jail. You know, they said leave the forest alone, or else. Same policy with the wildlife. If you want to see wildlife, go to Bhutan. So I'm just going to conclude with a few other things here. This is also Bhutan. These are Brokpa people. We're on a trek. We couldn't get the mules. The guy with the mules ran away, so we ended up with yaks, which is even better. So he's carrying the gas cylinder, so you don't have to chop down trees and use firewood. So these are Brokpa people. They use a yak hair hat. You see the hat here? If it rains, the water goes down that's the umbrella, right? It goes down the side. Anyway, the Brokpa descended from Tibetans. They moved centuries ago. But the interesting thing about the Brokpa is they're living inside a national park. Sakteng National Park, East Tibet, Far East Tibet. This park is supposed to give the Yetis a space to roam. It's set aside for Yetis. I'm not making this up. This is the truth. And nobody's ever seen a Yeti, but it's still, you know, give them space. Anyway, this disproves the Chinese theory that you cannot have nomads living in a national park. They say, oh, national park, nomads have to move out. You know, you can't have people living in a national park. These people are living inside. They've been living there for a long time. No problem. Occasionally a yak, your baby yak will be taken by a snow leopard. You know, they have this problem occasionally. But so I'm going to finish up here with, I probably talked far too long. A quote from the Dalai Lama, who generally crystallizes a lot of these things very well, but I'll just draw your attention, not the whole thing, but the last sentence. Many people in the past saw nature as inexhaustibly sustainable. They thought, you know, you can't damage the mountain, it's too big. You can't damage the ocean, it's too big. But we know that's not true anymore, because we're seeing the ocean suffering from plastic. We're seeing, you know, things disappear. We're seeing, you know, a lot of things changing that shouldn't be changing. So it's no longer true. You have to take care of the planet. If you don't take care of it, it's going to cause you a lot of problems as well. So I'm going to finish with a couple of pictures here. This is the national animal of China. It's the construction crane. That's the joke they have. And here's the real crane. That's the black-necked crane that flies from Tibet down to Bhutan every year, twice a year. It flies down and comes back. This is the Tibetan version rather than the Chinese version. So they're kind of similar, you know, they're a little bit different. So, you know, I went to the Sichu. It's a temple festival in November 11th. Sichu? Every November 11th in Gangte Gompa, central Bhutan, they have the crane festival. And this is recent. They've only done this for the last 10 years. And the reason they did it was to instill the fear of God in these kids that, you know, they should respect the cranes. So they dress them up as cranes, they do a dance in the temple courtyard. And they also do traditional dances, but these are the kids. So you see they flap the wings around, little costume there. And the Sichu, it's a big festival for that day. But they have a lot of other traditional dances. They have monks doing dances, they have women doing dances, but the highlight is the kids, you know. And this is Royal Society for the Protection of Nature, which is run by the king, the king's son now. And she's getting this black-necked crane put on her cheek, getting ready for that festival. So, you know, they have this huge respect for nature, which is what you need if you want things to survive. If you don't have the respect, then, you know, it falls apart. So that's my last picture there, I believe. So we can put that away and we can take a few questions. It's getting a little late. So I don't know what we're going to do for questions. What are you going to do? Don't ask me questions I can't answer. I mean, I'm not an expert on hydrology, or, you know, I'm not a scientist. I didn't even study geography, you know, but I just happened to be on the ground a lot, and I picked up a lot of clues and research, and, you know, that's where it comes from. So some questions maybe I can't answer, but, you know. So, anybody got a question? If you don't have a question, I got questions for you. Well, I got a question for you. Where do you get your water from? Where do you know, you want water, shower, whatever, where do you get your water from? Right, but what I'm saying is you just turn on a tap, right? Yeah. You know, a lot of people in the Himalayan areas, that doesn't work that way. You know, they might have to go some distance to pick it up from the river and haul it back, you know, like Tingri, back of Everest. They got these big, you know, they have to carry it in a bucket. They don't have a little tap to turn on. Chinese do, because they figured out the water thing, but Tibetans, even in Lhasa, they're using water pumps. Chinese got nice little, you know, everything's piped in. Not in the Tibetan areas, doesn't work. Tenzin.
Firstly, thank you very much for all the work that you have been doing for environment, and it helps us, and also building the kind of a campaign we've been doing over a long time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, my question is, you know, with all these concerns of water, especially rivers from Tibet and flowing down to India, as someone who's been following this, who's been studying this for a long time, what are the few, maybe two things you think India should do?
Ooh. Well, that's a tough one. Well, let's come back to the Kiang first, because you know, it's easy to talk about. You've got to remember, Kiang has never been domesticated. Never. There's a lot of animals in Tibet that have never been, they cannot tame them. The only ones that have been able to tame have been the yak and the mastiff. But they tried, because the Kiang is a very strong animal and they could use it as a pack horse, right? So the British, when they invaded Tibet, they would look at this animal and say, that'd make a great pack horse. Guess what? They couldn't tame a single Kiang to carry anything. They just bucked it all off, you know. Sorry, not going to do it. Anyway, that's a little bit of an aside. Yeah, well, what India can do, you see, India is also building a lot of dams. So it might look a little bit hypocritical if it starts criticizing China, but you might want to go for the transboundary thing, which, you know, there is an international transboundary agreement, which China has not signed, that states that the person who is upstream has a responsibility to the people downstream to supply them with water. And there is an agreement between India and Pakistan to do this. So India has claim to the Indus, and Pakistan has claim to the Indus, and India has claim to the Sutlej. But now with the trouble between Pakistan and India, India is reconsidering this and say maybe, well, we'll take our river back because they go through India first. But anyway, you know, the main thing is to try and apply pressure at the UN or something to have this transboundary, but it's gone nowhere because China did not sign it, and they've got no way of enforcing it. You know, and this situation happens only in Egypt. Egypt has threatened to bomb Ethiopia if they open their dam. Just threatened to bomb them. You know, that's the solution. But, you know, the downstream countries, the Mekong, they cannot send an airplane back to China and bomb them. It's not very practical. So, you know, it's stuck in a situation, it's a very gray area where you can't really do anything, and China has the upper hand because they got the upstream. If it was the other way around, if China was downstream, they'd be kicking and screaming and saying, "No, no, can't do that. We'll bomb you," you know. So, apart from bombing the dams, which has been done in Burma, they have actually bombed the dams with some success. You know, what can India do? The solution is reverse the map. Turn the map upside down, then India will be at the top, and then China will be screaming blue murder, and then, you know, but, you know, that's just a joke. I don't know if we could do that. The two things, I don't know if there's even one thing India could do right now. So India has always threatened China and say, you know, you have to give us hydrological data, you know, at least on the Tsangpo. And then what happened when there was a problem somewhere, China stopped producing the data. They used it as a threat. So China is actually threatening downstream countries like Mekong and the Mekong, like Vietnam, by not giving them data or refusing to give them any information. They punish them like this. So it's like a, what do you call that? It's a hydrological, what do you call it? Ransom in some way, you know. See, you don't play ball with us, we're not going to give you the water from upstream. That's they're using it as a weapon. It's a weaponization of water, and it's one of the first times in history it's ever been done. So when you're faced with that, what do? UN's pretty useless. They're not doing anything. So you can kick and scream and make a lot of noise, but that still doesn't affect China because China says it has the upstream sovereignty, and it doesn't care what happens when the water leaves it. It said so much. When the water leaves its border, it does not care what happens. As far as it's concerned, that water is being wasted downstream because people are not building dams downstream. That's their logic, that, you know, that's being wasted. So when you come up against a mentality like that, you know, what do you do? And then furthermore, they're not only going to dam it, they're going to divert the water. Because sooner or later, they're going to need the water because they're running out of groundwater. So they're going to have to divert the water before it even reaches the downstream country. And then how do you know when they're doing that? You don't know, because they got all the data. They could be doing it secretly. They could be doing it right now. We have no idea. So solutions are very few and far between when it comes to India. Because how are you going to get reprisals? You know, what does India have in leverage over China that it can threaten them with? What does it have? There's nothing much you can threaten them with. You know, you can't threaten them with military action. The only country that's been successful in military action against China is actually Vietnam. You know, it was around I can't remember what the year was, the Chinese tried to invade northern Vietnam to teach them a lesson, but they forgot that, you know, Vietnam had just survived 20 years of warfare with the French and the Americans because they had a lot of guerrilla warfare people, and they just came up and wiped them out. You know, so then they went back with the tail between their legs. So they're not that powerful when it comes to military, but you know, you can't really mount a military assault on a dam to correct the situation. So in the States, they've been decommissioning dams. They've been taking them down because they don't need the power anymore and they want the salmon. So they just actually blow them all up and, you know, decommission them. That's not happening in China. So I don't know if that answers your question really, but I think the map turned upside down. That's a good one. Unfortunately, that's not going to work too well.
Being serious, but I've seen your book before, and what kind of obstacle do you face in terms of talking about the water, you know, system, the whole environmental thing? Because Tibet is such a sensitive thing, and China is, you know, they just block it.
Well, I don't show up in Beijing that often.
Yeah, right. Anyway, outside in the US.
Yeah, no problem.
Like go around talking.
The biggest problem I had, I think, was Hong Kong. I showed up there shortly after the book came out. I showed up and I went to the Royal Geographical Society, and there was obviously some pro-Chinese elements in there that took me on about the dams. And we had a back and forth slanging match. You know, it was like I was shouting and they were shouting, and then I asked the director later. I said, "So how was that?" He says, "Fantastic. The controversy is amazing. You come back again, we'll invite you back anytime." You know? Because I thought I destroyed his audience. You know, and I thought he was very upset, but he was actually very happy. You know, because he said the controversy was great, and people were talking about it next day and the next week. You know, they thought it was a really good show. That was Royal Geographical Society. But I've been to other places where they think I'm making fun of the audience, and they get upset. You know. So you made fun of that man. You say, yeah, but he was saying stupid things, you know. So of course I got to make fun of him. So, you know, it depends who's the director, and, you know. But Hong Kong is probably the biggest thing I've come up against because, you know, heavily pro-Chinese in some quarters. even Royal Geographical Society. But otherwise, Singapore, yeah, little backlash here and there. Singapore is big Chinese population. Anywhere you go, there's a big Chinese population. They'll jump up and down, do the patriotic thing, wave the flag. We've never done anything wrong. So yeah, I mean, I think more people should talk about it, though. The more people that talk about it, the more we get, some things, NGOs going and actually do. But there's a lot of people who stay silent. Disney stays silent. Discovery Channel. Oh, there's a beautiful river. They don't mention the dam once. CBC, Canadian Broadcasting, do a big thing on a river. Not a single mention of dams on the river. Incredible. So they've been bribed and told not to say anything in the script that's anti-Chinese, and what can they do? They want to get in there, they have to abide by the Chinese rules. But it's a little bit strange what happens. So I've been accused of being polemical in this book. Polemical means you take the issue and you tell the truth, but they want it more roundabout, academic, let's be nice to China kind of thing. That kind of thing. Actually, I think the nicest thing that's said in that book was said by the Dalai Lama at the introduction. He said very nice things about the Chinese. I was shocked. I said, wow, that's the best thing that's been said about them in the book. But, yeah, he's nice about, but I'm not so nice. So, anyway.
Okay, I wanted to add one small thing to the question I was asking. About 13 years ago, there was a major flooding into Himachal, into this state,
right,
from Tibet side. There was an artificial water, kind of a lake got built inside Tibet called Parichu.
Okay.
And it was about to burst. There was a lot of danger when it actually happened. Number of roads, bridges got washed away, and some people also died. This happened in the Rampur area of Himachal, bordering to Tibet.
Yep.
And government of India and also this state asked for more information from the Chinese government. And they kept on saying, we will share more information, but then it never happened.
Yeah,
there was also a time when India was, at that time, couldn't really do much. Indian economy and also development wasn't really picking up at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Today, India could have done a little more. After seeing Doklam issue, we could see.
Yeah, well, there's a huge problem with the Kailash. That's a glacial lake outburst flood. That's when the meltwater builds up and builds its own dam. And that's a huge problem across Bhutan and Nepal and Tibet itself. And when it breaks, it just takes out entire villages, mudslides and everything. That's a glacial meltdown problem without even the construction of these hydroengineering projects. But China's been very secretive about most projects. They'll try and build the dam as fast as they can to stop the protesters. They don't even tell them. Beijing wakes up one day and says, dam? What dam? We didn't have told us anything about that dam. Because these are agencies, they have their own military, they have everything, and they just make it secret. And they build incredibly fast. They're usually ahead of schedule. There's a reason for that, is they don't want protest. But there's actually a case in southwest China where an NGO sued a Chinese dam builder for not fulfilling their promises, which would be quite easy to do because they never fulfill their promises. So that's maybe the way of the future. It's an NGO taking on the big company and say, we're suing you. You've not provided what you said you would provide. They said they would give villages schools and blah, 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 and all that, but they never did any of that stuff. So maybe there's hope with the Chinese NGOs, who can be quite ferocious. They've stopped some things, but that's the best hope, is the Chinese taking on the Chinese, Tibetans taking on the Chinese doesn't work very well. Never has, not recently. Anyway.
Thank you very much for your wonderful talk. And through your talk and the slides, we got an opportunity to visit the refreshingly cool, pure, clean Tibetan mountains and rivers.
He's a joker. Huh?
And at the same time, due to lack of environmental ethics, as you said, how an unplanned, process of so-called development and rush for quick money and things like that.
I think how much ethics is a big part.
And how much damage has already been done, we are able to clearly see it. And as far as environmental destruction is concerned, it's not only a concern about Tibetan people, it's a concern for the whole world. because the natural disasters like flood, famine, you know, for example, if there is an earthquake, they will not say we'll move only the Tibetans and not the Chinese, you know. You know, if there's a famine, also similar like that. So that is one thing, you know. So what I'm trying to say is, if we try to get just money without thinking about the human responsibilities and ethics, we are going to die a natural death. That is for sure, and that is what His Holiness has been saying for a long, long time. So as far as the solution is concerned, as you said, you know, China is using its power and money, and you know, it seems like nothing much we can do, but they're doing already.
Yes.
They're doing already. I always say that they're digging their own grave, because pollution that you saw in Peking itself. Chinese people are also like ordinary people. They also want fresh air. They don't want to die in a natural death, quick death, you see. So the repercussion will be there through their own doing. Okay? Not as if not enough having done that damage in their own country, now they are doing that damage in Tibet, and through the road belt policy, they are doing it everywhere. And so the repercussion will be very, very much there.
I think you brought up an interesting thing, though, ethics.
Yeah.
You see, if you don't have a religious base or some belief system, then you can't guarantee respect for nature, because it falls apart. And that's what Tibet did so well in the past.
That's true. Day after tomorrow, we are launching this international launching on secular ethics, which His Holiness is working very hard. And even that, they may not pay much attention. But when you start suffering, they have to pay. There's no other choice. You see, so it's really unfortunate that they are going to wait until to that extent. It's really like that. But let us be optimistic, and even in exile, you know, while in exile, we should, even in Himachal Pradesh, you know, in terms of our daily usage of water, we should really be careful, as you rightly mentioned. Every time we open the tap, we need to see from where the water is coming, you see. So we need to develop that environmental consciousness right now, so that wherever we live, we are able to share that, you know, how important it is for all of us. So thank you so much for your wonderful talk. Thank you.
Well, thank you for hosting this talk. He's done a really good environment here, and oh, great, thank you. Yes. Thank you. Yes.